through growth, you are testing and learning. So there is risk out on the line.
Goal number one is figure out how not to die. But it also ties back to tenacity.
Wow! You are listening to the Bold Business Podcast. Hey. In this program, Jess Dewell hosts experts who share information with you about solving problems and communicating priorities to help you guide your company toward its biggest goals. Come on!
Welcome to the Bold Business Podcast. This is Jess Dewell, your host, and today we're talking about growth. Duh, that's what we do on the Bold Business Podcast. And I have two fantastic people that I cannot wait to introduce you to in just a moment. Before then, make sure as you're tuning in, thinking about growth, thinking about the challenges that you're facing and how you can be inspired by the questions that you have. Don't forget, pass this on to a friend, pass this on to a colleague, and make sure that you are subscribed to your favorite listening platform. So not only do you get to hear today, Maia and Bocar, you also will get notified of our upcoming programs. Today, I am so excited. Like I said, I couldn't wait any longer. First, I'd like to introduce you to Bocar, Forum's Manager Director. That sits at the intersection of investing and working one-to-one with portfolio founders to the early stages of building. Not only that, it's the go-to market. It's the founder-led sales and fundraising pieces too. You know who you are. You're in the audience, so tune in a little closer. As part of the founding team of the enterprise product at Hootsuite, Bocar helped the business grow to well over $150 million and 200 plus employees in under 7 years. He continues to co-fund, advise, coach, angel invest, not only in SaaS startups, but also the pre-seed to Series A. He's a sales coach at Harvard Business School, a curator at Revenue FYI, and he also blogs at scaling2100, that's the number 100.com. Also joining us today is the amazing Maia Benson, is a partner and managing director at Forum Ventures. She invests and works with early-stage B2B SaaS founders. That's business-to-business software as a service, and goes from inception to scale. With over 20 years of founding, building, and scaling award-winning SaaS products and platforms, not only for entrepreneurs and small businesses, she's worked with companies like LexisNexis, Pitney Bowes, their Send Pro platform and apps, and most recently at Shopify. Many of you know that. I know that because you talk about this out there in the world, where over 5 years, she has spent founding and launching and scaling their shipping and fulfillment with 60% plus merchant adoption. Now that's a lot for both of these people. Let me just tell you, I want to recognize that the conversation we're having today with Maia and with Bocar, specifically, we're talking about things that you normally might not think about that I want you to, because this is a resource that we need more of. And the timing is perfect. Now is the time. You're acting, you're executing, and here we go. Welcome to the show, people.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jess. Great to meet you.
Yes, it is wonderful to be here today with you. Just real quick, I want to hear from both of you before we jump into the meat of the conversation. Why? Why investing? Why scaling? Why startups? Why SaaS? Why whatever else you want to fill in the blank with?
Let me start, I think. So one of the interesting things about Forum is that, yes, we are investors. We invest in about 100 companies every year, and generally of the pre-seed seed stage. We also have an accelerator and a studio. But really what's unique about us is that my role, Maia's role, is actually not just investing. I would actually argue that the majority of the time we actually spend working alongside our portfolio companies and actually helping them with some of the things that they need help with. My background at Hootsuite was really seeing a company grow from pre-revenue to about 200 million in revenue by the time I left. Learned a ton there. I was a founder after that, so I can empathize with the founders that I work with. But really, I wouldn't be in an investment role if I didn't feel like I could add value to the founders that I'm working with. So a lot of what I spend my day doing is actually really helping founders with their customer validation and customer acquisition. And I love that. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Why SaaS? Because that's a lot about what I know. So that's easy answer. I've been building SaaS products for 15, 20 years. So that's the easiest answer. Why investor? Like Bocar, I think it's impactful for founders to meet people on the other side of the table, so to speak, that have walked and lived in their shoes and have operated and built stuff for a long time, right? So I think that really gives us a bunch of empathy, but it also gives us a bunch of, we know the playbooks, we know we've had some learnings we can impart and share to really help you through your journey. So I think that was the hypothesis for me on what if we could bring and grow more partners that are investors that have that deep founding and operational experience. So I think that's why investing. I think why Forum. I had the fortune to invest in, personally advise myself, advise other venture firms. And when you deeply understand the Forum model, it's very clear how different we approach investing. So to Bocar's point, we are capital allocators. We write pre-seed seed checks, but we also take an extremely high touch approach with our founders. And so that's hopefully just illuminating why at least I made, and similar reasonings from Bocar, the shift from operator land to investor land.
Bocar Dia, is most of what you do in the technology realm? Do you also work in other areas?
It's mostly B2B software companies that we invest in, which is actually pretty broad, by the way. So
it's very broad.
It's a lot of verticals that we touch, which is actually part of the fun as well. Maia, lots of context switching.
Yes, tons of context switching. We're generalist investors, Jess. And to Bocar's point, like it won't surprise you, we invest in kind of all the standard venture scale verticals. Mm-hmm. So there's many of them, but yeah, we are across all of them.
In a few months or years, we'll know when. Maybe we'll drop the SaaS and just start talking about AI, right? Because everything is artificial intelligence.
That's very bold statement. And I can't wait to see what that actually means in 5 years, because I think it's true today. And then as we get there, it gets clearer and more specific. I could be a little wrong about that. That's how I feel about technology and SaaS and B2B and integration of technology, even online, since 2006 and 2000, even earlier, 1996, 1995 even, right? So I'm curious if the trajectory from that realm will be faster with AI because we've done it before. It sounds like that's an area you're interested in.
I think it will be. I'm not a hype believer by any means. I tend to be generally pretty skeptical of platform shifts, but this one is actually a real platform shift. It's going to be as big a shift as the internet was, then the cloud, then mobile, then social. Then I think we're now in the age of AI. And I think so. We tend to talk about Gen AI, which is generative artificial intelligence in very technical terms. But I think real innovation now is that ever since computers were computers, we were interacting with computers with mice and keyboards and directing computers to do the things that we want them to do. But now computers understand English, right? They understand our language. And think about how things change when you can interact with computers in that way. So I, for one, am a believer that things will change quickly with the good and the bad. We just have to be careful about the bad and make sure that the good is what wins out.
It's going to happen faster than our infrastructure and our regulations and our laws and our policies are going to evolve. We could spend the entire hour, Jess, on this subject alone.
I'm telling you, I get excited about it too. So it sounds like we may have a part 2 in our future. Provided you like podcasts and you have a good time here, this could be of interest because I'm in complete agreement about that, looking at the parallels and how we can go forward. And that's what we bring to the table. And that's actually the basis of our question today. So Maia, I want to hear from you. In a dynamic business environment, how can a company effectively manage those unexpected challenges that arise during periods of growth?
Yeah, so growth is like this unbelievably awesome thing And I mean that in every definition of awesome. And it has vast impact on every function and part of an organization, right? So I just think at a first principle level, growth creates a whole lot of impact on literally every function of an organization. Just to give people size and scale and kind of an orientation from a Maia point of view, when I joined Shopify, I think we were about 700 employees. And when I left, we were 9,500. When I joined, we had $0 in shipping and fulfillment revenue. When I left, we had these levels of impact. Through that evolution and these high periods of growth, I think everybody at a first principles level needs to understand this is going to touch every function, right? There's no one that's going to be spared from the impact of kind of high growth. I think some of the tips and tricks that I've seen work successfully during those high growth periods of time is just two buckets that I think you got to manage throughout the cycles. And both of them need to consistently anchor in really one thing. And that's as you're going through exponential growth, you have to have ongoing, agile, consistent communication around what the true norths are. Like, what is the entire team across sales, marketing, product, legal, finance? I just said, not everybody's going to be impacted, but how does everybody have agile, ongoing, updated windows into the true north of what must be true for the company to be successful through the growth? Okay, so I think that's a huge anchor point I just want to make. And then the two kind of machinations or domains that I think about as people are going through high growth is there's this world of let's put floors or processes in place to keep building for the long term. So that long term kind of repeatable, what can we put in place to scale? Muscle has to be flexed while at the same time you're firefighting, right? And so I think managing both of those levers and having a culture that embraces both of those levers is also really critical during high growth, right? So if you know we're going to be putting in stuff that's going to be repeatable and for the long term, and we're also going to be doing stuff that's going to be disposed and is not going to live very long, I think those are really critical. Underscoring all of this framework, I think culture is just at the center, in the heart, and envelops all of these points. And I think cultures that thrive and succeed through growth do a couple things really well. Like, one, they get very good at decision-making, fast decision-making. Two, I think they also, to enable that, get really good at disagreeing quickly, but committing, right? And as decision reversibility increases, then now those decisions the output can be made faster. But where there are decisions that are less reversible, it's still really critical to have a culture that says, look, I might disagree with this long-term commitment we're about to make, but I'm going to commit to it, and I'm going to jump in the boat and be a part of that decision and that choice. So I think the culture first principles to survive and thrive through growth are important. Two other ones I probably just should obviously state. Through growth, you are testing and learning, right? So there is risk out on the line, which is just so core to the bold focus that you have, Jess. It's core to this podcast, right? So test and learn, take risk is obviously a core ingredient in cultural norm as if you want to succeed during high growth periods. And then I think there's also the companies that I've seen that have really navigated growth quickly have just a highly collaborative culture. Because as you're growing, you've got all these domain experts or all these functions that have parts of the picture and parts of the data sets. And so if you've got a DNA that is oriented and share, collaborate, then magically, guess what happens? You make better, faster decisions. And so that's a Maia lens on how growth impacts an organization, what you have to keep true and really clearly communicated to the broader organization around those true norths, those KPIs, how you're going to be building long-term investments in processes and tools, while at the same time firefighting and throwing things away. And then again, some core cultural tenets that I think I've seen companies keep and do well to help them enjoy that hopefully very long growth cycle.
Bocar, in a dynamic business environment, how can a company effectively manage the unexpected challenges that arise during periods of growth?
What's interesting about part of having a good process about looking at growth is to add on to Maia's side here. And I'll take not the inward looking kind of perspective, but I think one thing that's also important is to understand the context outside your walls as well when you're thinking about growth, right? And I'll give you a very simple example. In the space that we're in for the last 10, 12 years of very low interest rates, capital was available, right? And capital was easily available to fuel growth. So you could, as long as you're growing your revenue, your top line, you could go out and find investors that will write you checks to help continue fueling that growth. Now capital has become expensive again, right? And not as available. So when you're thinking about growth, then you've got a different equation there, because now not only do you have to grow the top line, it has to be done in a way that's efficient, because folks are looking at the quality of that growth as an example, right? And every day I meet founders that just haven't really ran their business in such a way that unit economics mattered or margins mattered and all of the things that now investors are asking for. So part of growing is also understanding if your business needs capital in order to grow, understand what the capital is actually asking for, because you need to understand what situation you're currently in. And that's not just looking at investors, but that's also looking at customers themselves, right? Like your prospective customers in your customer base are also going through potentially economic hardships, right? There's a lot of sectors currently in the software space where customers are consolidating their stack. They're not adding products. They're looking at ways to get more out of the dollars that they're spending, right? So if you have that context in mind, that gives you a different approach when it comes to scaling. All to say, I think growth is something that you look at when it comes to really setting up the right structure to enable you to grow, to Maia's point, by looking at culture, value, processes, and other things. But I think one failure point is almost always not understanding the situation that you're in. And you can only understand that situation by actually looking outside as well and getting a sense of, hey, what's the context with my business partners? What's the context currently for my customers? And what's the context currently for my shareholders? Because that's the lens that you should take as well to understand what everybody needs and balance that.
If you are ready to make a real impact in your business and you've waited too long to take action, go to reddirection.com and click on Solutions to find out how.
It's been a long time since I've been in the mergers and acquisitions realm, and it's worth doing. So I know there are groups of people that are listening that some would call bootstrappers, some would call organic growth focused. They don't want outside investment. I'm going to say right now, this conversation matters to you too. This is a big myth and a big misnomer that just because we're talking about things that your company might not do, you can't learn from them. That is a big fat no, totally wrong. And I want to know from each of you why. Why is it wrong to just opt out of a conversation that could actually help us learn?
Yeah, I want to just validate that, Jess. Bocar and I are in an investment. We operate under an investment lens that happens to support venture capital risk models. That doesn't mean the first principles of what you need to consider as you're growing don't apply if you're not choosing to grow in either a venture capital scale market or leveraging venture capital. So I just think that's a really meaningful point. Building a business is ubiquitous to no matter who you are, what industry you're in, all the same first principles of really deeply understanding your customers, all of their pain points, and building magical solutions to solve them is just a process that's repeated across every founder and every entrepreneur ever.
So what's interesting about the example you gave earlier, Jess, is that Funnily enough, I don't know whether you would agree with this statement, Maya. It was actually founders that operated within venture that didn't really pay attention to what the bootstrapping founders were doing, right? Because when you're bootstrapping, you have to be very mindful of your cash flow, your runway, your margins, really making sure that you know how many dollars you need to invest to get customer revenue. And actually, you're dependent on that customer revenue to fuel your growth. I actually think venture-based founders today have a lot to learn from what founders that have been bootstrapping for the last 5-10 years have been doing. Because fundamentally, I actually believe that the next 5-10 years in venture are going to be refocusing on efficient growth versus growth at all costs, which is what has happened. So you basically have a generation of founders that probably don't know how to run an efficient business. And you've got a lot to learn from founders that have bootstraps. So to your point, I think everybody can learn from other places. And also sometimes I encounter companies that are bootstrapped that could use some capital to fuel that growth. It's just that the founder maybe has some mental block around it. But I think generally speaking, it's always about thinking about, hey, where can you learn best practices that you could actually apply so that you can fuel the growth in the way that you want to fuel it? And I think there's a lot of good lessons to learn everywhere. And about it.
And sometimes you just got to live through those. And hopefully you have some help, like the two of you, or awareness of them as you are marching towards something that can be averted in some way, potentially. Bocar, you're talking a lot about efficient business. And I know what you've been talking about in the first principles also comes down to that. Reading between the lines, I just want to say it differently. Would that be, hey, quality growth and efficient growth actually comes down to for getting capital of any kind, it doesn't matter how much you want. It doesn't matter how much you want to grow. It matters that you have a clear story.
Yeah, that's certainly a big part of it.
What else is a part of it?
I think the story part that got down.
And that separates people. I don't want to build that story. I don't want to have to convince people of that story is part of that conversation. Yeah.
I think that's first principles, right? Like everything's storytelling, right? You have to tell a great story to convince investors. You have to tell a great story to invest, to convince your customers, to convince people to work for you. So story, I think of as like the one of the baseline. I think what comes after the story is actually delivering on the thing that you said you're going to deliver on, which is the execution part, which is a little harder. And for a long time, people just didn't need to back up what they said, or the top line was just the only thing that people looked at. So when I think of efficient growth, I mostly think about, do you know, like when I think about it from even like a go-to-market standpoint, do you know who your customers are, how to get them? Do you know how to deliver value for those customers, and you know how to keep those customers? Because if you can't answer those 3 questions, then you've got a business. You can't answer those questions if you don't know if you put $1 on one side of the equation, how many dollars you get back, then there's probably some work that you need to do before scaling. What I meant earlier was that a lot of companies didn't really need to show the formula and the repeatability before getting capital, as long as the revenue was growing. And I meant it.
Yeah, when you're swimming in a lot of capital, you get to buy 2 things. You get to buy time, and you get to buy more failure. And so efficiency, I think, really means hyper focus with less resources. Right? So find your initial customer set quickly, reach out to them through efficient methods, and work closely with them to prove that whatever you're building together is going to lower cost or increase revenue. Right? So that's, I think, the core difference between the former days and the nowadays.
Not to paint a dire picture of the nowadays, I actually am quite excited about the current picture, because now it's back to business fundamentals. It's back to solving real customer problems and getting customers to vote by effectively saying, hey, yeah, you're doing a good job, here's some money, which wasn't necessarily the case.
And training founders with those first principles to then become CEOs in 7 or 10 years when their companies grow up with better CEO orientation and lens, right? So it is for those of us that have built businesses with gravity, like Maia likes to say, gravity, or you have to justify the investment with a return that's on a horizon that's not forever from now. Like, it's actually a really exciting time.
Focused on growth? Listen to more programs like this which support the challenges and opportunities you are working with right now. Come on! Search Bold Business Podcast for the key terms at reddirection.com or your preferred podcast listening app.
We're listening to the Bold Business Podcast. Actually, we're talking, you're listening. Let's just be real about that. I'm talking with Maia Benson and Bocar. And I have to say, the funding conversation that we are having, the business conversation that we are having will help you shape what you are doing in your business today, regardless of the path that you are on to grow. And it may make you excited to think, ooh, something that wasn't appealing to me before because I care about the fundamentals now might be. And how can I solve this problem bigger, better, differently? Don't forget, find somebody that you know to send this to, because the advice, the tips, and the information being shared here by Bocar and by Maia are things that will help you in not only your business execution, also in your planning, and maybe poke some holes to make better your strategic vision. As we go into the second part of this program, I wanted to go back to something, Maia, that you said. And you were mentioning the dichotomy between building to scale and fighting fires, and that's a tricky place to be in any business, because we all have them. We all have that balance of that long term and what's happening right now. And so I want to hear from both of you, what are some of the ways that you have experienced and that you have watched the businesses that you are investing in, the companies that you're investing in, actually work through those as well?
Yeah, so I think from an early stage point of view, I talk about this in my product road mapping session. The decisions you choose to make on how you build your product, for example, in the early days, the weight of consideration and evaluation that you need to put in for defining what you're going to build product-wise, either with a long-term mentality or a short-term disposable mentality, are directly proportionate to the reversibility of that decision. Okay, so we've got a bunch of founders that are building upfront investments in the architecture, the infrastructure of their products, and that is setting them up for long-term success. We've also got another group of founders that are building for the short term on more kind of disposable product or tech platforms to prove the hypothesis that the market wants it, right? And so both are okay depending upon what the product is and what the market interaction and engagement and proof is. So either is okay. It's just what we try and help our founders with is just being very cognizant and conscious of those types of choices, right? Capital expense for tech and development of IP is something you really want to consider. The other big consideration we help founders with every day, the other obvious big expense is labor, right? The talent, the team, right? And core founders and founding engineers in our world and founding growth teammates, those are very highly costly decisions if you choose to reverse those, right? So getting those right and the consideration against those take a long time to interview. If you're building your founding team that is going to build the thing and work 15 hours a day alongside you, spend a lot of time there. That said, if there are other jobs that need to be done, there might be part-time or more disposable approaches to those resources. So those might involve less consideration. So those are some of those anchors of how to build early on and where two big cost things in our world is building the tech or having the people that build the tech. And so that's how I think about building for the long term versus being more open to disposability.
One thing that I was thinking about as you asked the question, Jess, was that I think quite often when we think about that dichotomy that you talked about, right? You're putting out fires in a very reactive way, but at the same time, you have to be planned and deliberate and strategic with the other things. I think a lot of the times when we address this topic, we think that it only applies to earlier stage companies. If anybody on this call that's listening in has ever worked at a large organization, they know that's also the case. I've got stories that I could share of some of the top companies in the world. And I'm not going to go there because I might need their capital someday. Let's just say that you'd be surprised to know that is also true in large, public, very well-respected organizations. The first thing that I would say is just know that it's actually pretty normal, right? And know that this is not in any way suggesting that you're not doing things right when you're this tug and pull between those two worlds, because the reality is that you're always there. And I think from my perspective, the way I think about it is that you're always going to have fires that you need to put out. I think it's really just more about figuring out how you want to prioritize things and really think about the things that are critical failure points that you need to fix. And to Maia's point earlier, I think Jeff Bezos actually has this great framework on making decisions where he thinks about, is this a decision that's reversible? In that if we make the decision, if it's reversible, maybe we don't need to be in analysis paralysis here trying to think about whether we want to do it or not, because we know that we can reverse it, right? There's other type of decisions that are irreversible, so to speak, that have massive impacts, right? So I think it's always a consideration of what the priorities are. And I think that main thing is always, and I keep saying this, but I think one of the constant failure points that I see is not understanding the situation that you're in, but also having alignment as an executive team or as a leadership team when it comes to what the priorities are and what matters and what you're working towards. Because once you have that, then I think you have a different lens when it comes to the fires, right? So if you look at putting out a small fire and you look at it and you think, this is not going to impact any of the things that we're working towards that matter the most, then you don't care about that small fire. But if you don't have a way of a lens or a way of analyzing problems and prioritizing, then you're always going to have issues, I think. But that's the thing that I wanted to mention. I think that there's this conception that it only happens in smaller companies and in growing companies. It's just a constant state of the world, I think, when you're running a business.
Yeah.
In life too. Let's just be real.
Yeah, let's be real. I do want to say, I do think that's absolutely right. There, the slight nuance that for folks that are listening that are building something now and in those early days, what's so hard to be a founder is those expensive decisions and those cheap decisions. So the firefighting and the long term in those early days all come at you at the same time and feel, because you have limited time, equal weight. So that is what makes being a founder like so challenging, is you've got limited resources, you've got limited time, you've got to make great decisions, but equally all the time, the long-term consequence ones and the short-term firefighting ones are coming in kind of almost equally loud. And so we all talk about rigorous prioritization. It's true. It's all of our lifelong challenges and opportunities, but it's just extra hard for those early stage founders because they're doing all the things.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, how the early decisions have such a huge impact down the road. And the analogy that I think about is when you're launching a rocket, a 1% difference at the beginning of that trajectory could mean missing the planet that you're aiming for completely. Whereas it's later on, you might miss where you want it to land, but you'll still hit the planet, right? So yeah, to your point, Maia, at the early stage, I think it's even more critical to think about that.
Hey, did you know? Of those of us with a plan, 10% just have an idea, 75% have written but don't use their plan, and 15% successfully achieve what is in their plan. Know exactly where you are and what is the necessary work to get where you want to go with a growth mindset reset. This is dedicated time to evaluate exactly where your business is, where you want it to go, and the trajectory you are currently on. Go to reddirection.com solutions to get started.
The risk minimization framework that you mentioned, Bocar, is that something that you employ with the companies that you work with?
I tend to think, generally speaking, it depends on the kind of business that you're building early stage. I think when you're wanting to build a venture scale type of business and you want some investments into your business, then it's a much more pragmatic view of thinking about, hey, what are some of the milestones that I need to hit to reach my goal, which oftentimes is I want to raise $3 million worth of seed capital, right? So what do you need to prove out in order to be able to raise $3 million of capital, as an example? And then when you look at it from that lens, I think some of the decisioning and risk factor becomes a little easier, so to speak. It's never easy, to Maia's point earlier, but I think you have at least a much better lens when it comes to it. So I think it's much more about thinking about it from a pragmatic standpoint of what are the key things that I need to care about and that I need to accomplish, and just be pragmatic about that. Because oftentimes, by the way, because I'm looking at it in terms of milestones, but the risk equation is oftentimes what investors are trying to actually do, is like a lot of building conviction is actually de-risking the business. So you can think about it from the same lens. I'm just looking at it from the lens of these are the milestones, these are the areas that you need to focus on. Because most of the time, what I find is founders are not very clear early stage about where they should be focusing their time and effort.
Maia, are you also using that framework, or do you use different frameworks to suss out the way to prioritize to get people to the goal that they have?
No, it goes back to what I said, what Bocar said, like, your goal is not to die. So,
hands down.
Key true north number one.
Oh.
And then the other key true norths are, don't mess up with your customers. They're the most valuable things you got. Don't mess up with your employees. Those are the other most valuable thing you got. So just have very clear, practical, obvious true norths that you anchor against. And then just some of it's just do your best with the rest, right? So that's what it is, right?
And in the end, that's what we're all doing the best with the rest. And yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
But one thing I was going to add, just because I think we're talking about this from the perspective of what are the frameworks and how do you prioritize things from a business perspective. But I think then you need to translate that into what that means for you as a leader at Interdate, which is have a different equation. But I think if you have a baseline understanding of the things that matter, then personally what I like to use, and I used it as when I was an operator, I used it when I was a founder, I use it today. There's something called the Eisenhower matrix of just managing your time. And I live by that. Once you know what is important, right, and what the core things are, then you can think about it in terms of your time investment. Is it important and urgent? In which case you do it right away, right? If it's important but not urgent, maybe you've got some ability to delegate it to folks or like work with folks on things. So it's a quadrant matrix, and I live by that. And I never really ever do anything that's not important and not urgent. Frankly, I don't even have time to even look at those things. I don't know how that shows up, but I think once you think about the business framework and what matters, then I think the second step is translating that into how you do it as an individual. So as a leader, do it for yourself, but also enable team to be very clear about how they would do that for themselves as well.
So with the founders that you're looking at and that founding team, what are some of the skills that you have been surprised by, that when people lean into them or they just have them inherently, they move that needle towards success?
I think actually one of the magical things about Forum, specifically a skill set that we really value, is those founders that are asking and want and open to feedback and help. Like, I think we just fundamentally believe those founders outperform a lot of the folks that maybe don't fit those skill sets or have that DNA. So I just want to highlight, I think that's a core kind of value set of ours and the investment thesis. I think other core skill sets or traits, whatever we want to say, like by definition, you're showing up and probably not taking a paycheck when you call up Bocar, right? So you've got a high risk appetite. You've proven you can build something, right? In our world, it's software. And you've got either empathy or a connection to the market. So you want to really sit and work with and for your customers to build magic. Or like I said in my first statement, maybe that's not your superpower and that's okay, but you want to ask for help and you want to get better at that. So I think those are really key traits and skill sets. We love it when founders call us up and have just the absolute perfect, what we call problem to founder fit, right? Like, I love this problem. I know this problem better than anyone on the planet, and I am uniquely born and suited to solve it. So I think that problem to founder fit is also a great example of what we look for.
I think there's patterns that you can see in successful founders, business leaders, and there's certain things that generally will show up. But I think what I'm the most surprised by is just the diversity in founder profiles that can actually also be successful sometimes, right? There's an interesting, I think there's a book, I'll try to remember what the name of the book is, but there was some research that was done where they did research on thousands of founders that were successful and compared them to thousands of founders that weren't successful and looked at some of the biases that people generally have. There's a bias in, for example, in tech where they think, oh, it's younger founders that will be the most successful. Whereas when you actually look at the average age of successful founders, it's actually late 30s, early 40s, right? So it's not your Mark Zuckerbergs of the world because they make for better stories, right?
Yeah.
But those are the things that you look at. So I think what's interesting as you ask this question is that, yes, we can answer when it comes to some of the things that are common patterns. But what I think is actually even more interesting to me is the fact that you actually find different founders with different skill sets. And I think it goes back to the situation. I am talking about the founder problem fit, which we think is very important, right? But sometimes you also have somebody from the technology sector that comes in and tries to solve things within healthcare. And because they have a different lens, they're a little bit more successful at solving it than somebody who's always ever lived in healthcare, as an example, right? So very interesting to see also how, depending on the situation, different profiles can also be successful. And generally speaking, I think if I were to pick one skill, which is not, I don't know if I can call it a skill, but the best founders, I think, are very self-aware, meaning that they know where they're strong and where they're weak and effectively surround themselves with the people that can help them execute with that situation. So as much as you can anchor on skills that you have and you don't have, I think if you're from a starting point very self-aware, then whatever skills you don't have, you also hire for, which I think is actually a good thing. So founders that are coachable and very self-aware, if I were to pick two things, would be the two things, because when you think about it, if you're coachable, you'll get better at the things, right? And if you're self-aware, you know what things you're good at and what things you're not good at, and you'll surround yourself with the right folks.
Maia, what makes it bold? What makes it bold to build a business to effectively manage all these challenges that we've talked about today during periods of growth?
Your chances of growth are a lot less if you're not bold. So to me, they go by definition. They're almost the same thing, Jess. So for fun, I looked up the core traits of being bold, and it's, risks and confidence and courage and strong and vivid. All of this is standing out a degree away from the norm. And so I just think they're the same thing, right? Bold is growth is bold. And you need those kind of core bold traits to realize growth. So I know I'm maybe being a little meta today on whatever day of the week we're at, so that's just maybe a meta answer. Like within growth, what does it mean to be bold? It means have a culture that supports taking risks and wants fast failure, right? Yeses are good. Nos are equally as good. Just go get both as fast as you can, right? So I think that's an example of a core ingredient to drive growth. You need courage and collaboration and strength to show up every day and take those risks, and candidly support each other through taking those risks. So maybe those are a couple of the hows, but candidly, I think boldness and growth are the same thing.
Bocar, what makes it bold? What makes it bold to build a business that effectively manages the challenges of periods of growth?
Let's face it, building a business at any stage is very hard. And it's always easier to quit than it is to do anything else. So when I think about bold, I think the word that comes to mind for me is tenacity, right? I think founders that keep working at it, business builders that keep working at it, you'd be surprised, by the way, as to how many businesses that are massive businesses today that are well respected went through near complete failures, right? Or failures for a while before becoming big businesses, right? And as a matter of fact, you can see this through the data. We talk about celebrating failure sometime in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley, but I think it's more about, I think the founders that keep failing, that continue building businesses, learn through those failures, which is why if you're a second time business builder, third time business builder, you're just going to do it in a better way than you did the first time, hopefully. So for me, it all goes back to tenacity, because there's going to be challenges coming from every side of building a business. And I think the more that you can have that grit and tenacity and keep persevering through it, the more you'll have opportunities that you can capitalize on. There's a lot of businesses that I see that kind of shut down, and if you go through this thought experiment of like, if this business continued going another year, things would have changed by then. And I think it's always about going back to what I guess we were saying earlier, which is like goal number one is figure out how not to die. But it also ties back to tenacity. By the way, that's also one of my goals as an individual. I don't know if I'm ever gonna hit that, right? Not dying as an individual. Is that a goal that somebody should have? Maybe not. I'm getting into crazy talk here already, but all to say tenacity, I think for me is the big one when it comes to that.
Wow! Jess hosts the Bold Business Podcast to provide insights for building a resilient, profitable business by deeply understanding your growth strategy, ensuring market relevance, and your company's future. It is bold to deeply understand your growth strategy with your host, Jess Dewell. Get more information about how to drive solutions and reset your growth mindset at reddirection.com. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our post-production team at The Scott Treatment.